Devil in a black cloak, street gospel, light of the temple. Sword swing, killer live from the ghetto. The hood messenger, let them know hell's close. Blackberry on the devil in a black cloak.
Yo, what's up, everybody? This is Dave One from the Street Gospel Podcast. So there have been plenty of questions that have been asked to us. I mean, crazy questions, all kinds of questions. So with this short but nice podcast, we're going to answer those questions. Question number one. Has anybody ever gotten mad at the podcast or you as a host for having somebody on, maybe something they said, or maybe a subject? Okay, yes, there have been people that have gotten mad. Mostly it has been family members of guests who have came in. So maybe a guest comes in and the guest says something and it's a little controversial, or maybe it touches a nerve, or maybe it's something they bring up, right? So they bring up something and it's kind of not a good thing to bring up. So we had somebody that they threatened to sue. We've had people that have come on and said something and their family members have gotten upset at them and at me. We've had people come on where they said, man, that was a little hurtful. Listen, we put the podcast together. We invite the guests in. Our main thing is when we invite the guests in, we ask them, is there anything off the table that you do not want to talk about? And we give them an opportunity. Very rarely does somebody say, don't talk about this. It's usually they'll talk about anything. Now, I'm not here to probe. I'm not here to exploit anybody. I'm not an investigative news reporter. It's just a conversation. So when we talk, I'm asking questions like I normally would ask if we were sitting alone at a restaurant eating. So has people gotten mad? Yes. Have I been approached by people? Yes. And I've had to explain what was going on. So that is question number one. Yes, people have gotten mad. Question number two. Do you ever edit anything out of the podcast? So we don't edit anything out of the podcast. There was one particular thing that somebody asked me to edit out. It was about 3 seconds. It was maybe 5 seconds. It was a little something they had said, and they just like, you know what? I just think that was dumb. So as a favor, I did it to this person. And am I going to tell you who it is? No, I'm not going to tell you who it is. But for the most part, I should say not for the most part, but I should say always, Cam, when he goes into edit, he doesn't edit anything out. So whatever said here when we're recording is always played on the podcast. There's no taking it back. So we just believe that there's some, I guess there's a little bit more integrity when you do it that way. There's a little bit more realness. We're not here to like get pieces and try to, change around what the guest says or trying to make them sound like they really didn't sound, whatever it may be. We don't edit anything out. We play it like it is. It's all recorded and we just let it ride. Question number three. Who does the intro song to the podcast? Okay, I've been asked this a ton of times. So there's a guy out there. His name is Malachi Dominion. He made a song called Street Gospel. I was doing a show called Street Gospel, graffiti music. We even had lowriders, bands, DJs come out and play. And so they had a song. He had a song called Street Gospel. I knew his brother. His brother said, hey, man, I'm going to connect you with him. He gave me the song. And then when we started the podcast, it just fit perfect. So he's on SoundCloud. He's on Instagram, Malachi Dominion with the Street Gospel theme song. Question number 4. Who is your favorite guest? Okay, so I think all the guests are great. I mean, every single one of them have came in here, have told a great story about themselves, story of overcoming, story of fighting through. I would say I don't have a favorite guest, but when somebody says, hey, I want to check out your podcast, usually I send them 1 or 2 podcasts. The first one I usually send them, and it's always pretty much, is the Billy Hall podcast. That podcast, if people just listen, there's so much to that story. It's just unbelievably crazy. The second one I mostly send people is the Richard Rodriguez podcast. So when I send that one, another great story of overcoming. Both those ones kind of sum up the entire podcast and what we're about. So those two, Billy Hall, Richard Rodriguez, but I love every single guest. Every single guest has had a great story. They've been fun. If we go back to episodes like number 2 with Chris Santos talking about sneakers, we had a great time. To my buddy Mike Wubker talking about history. We can talk to the Taco God. Was hilarious. One of my best ones. Terrence Delane, comedian. So all of them are great. I love them all. But if there's 2 that if I had to send them to somebody, or one I had to send them to somebody, it would be Billy Hall or Richard Rodriguez. All right, question number 5. Is every guest you have on a Christian? No. So are we a faith-based podcast? Yeah, we're a faith-based podcast. I mean, there's no doubt about that, but is everybody that we have on a full-fledged Christian? No. So I like to talk to people that just have an interesting story. If God is a part of that story, that even makes it better. But there's been people that have come on. They're not necessarily believers. If you remember Taco God, he came on. I had a great time. The guy's a great dude. He's funny. He's really down to earth. He cussed. So there was a couple of people who were like, oh my God, he cussed on your podcast. And it was like kind of like controversial, but it was kind of like funny to me because we're around people that cuss all the time. So what does it matter? At work, at school, in the street, wherever we're at. So I didn't have a problem with that. The guy was a great guy. So we invite everybody on. I don't care if they have a great story. There's some people that have come on, told their story, have a great message. So we have everybody on and we welcome everybody. Question number 6. Is there a guest you want to have really bad? I mean, there's just somebody you want on the show no matter what. I mean, of course. I mean, if I had to shoot for a guest that was like way up there, I would pick like a Kanye West or a Nick or Nate Diaz or Greg Laurie. Like those are guests that I would just love, but they would have to be in here. They would have to be in here. I would have to have them in studio. I just feel like I could vibe with them. Like we can just talk. We can just get some good dialogue going. So I would say Kanye, maybe the Diaz brothers. I really would like to have like a Greg Laurie. But I mean, that's shooting high. So yeah, those 3 guests, if anybody knows them, put a good word in for me. Street Gospel. Question number 7. Do you know every guest personally? So that one is, I would say probably 95% of the guests. What do you think, Cam? Maybe 95% maybe more, huh? What do you think? 90? Yeah, I would say 90% of the guests I know personally. I had a relationship with them prior to the podcast, whether it was through jiu-jitsu or church or work, the street, whatever it may be. I had a personal relationship. So I've been lucky in that realm where, I didn't think about like what guests I want to have. I just was like, oh, my friend so-and-so. Oh, my friend so-and-so. Oh, I can call so-and-so. And then it just, after a while, you start thinking like, man, I really know that person. I really know that person. And then people were like asking me like, how do you know all these people? That's pretty crazy. You know all these people. It's just, I guess over the years you meet people and you become friends and you stay friends. And then you say, hey, you have a great story. I mean, Richard Rodriguez was one. We were hanging out and then he started reminding me of his story. And I was like, yo, will you come on the podcast and tell that story? He's like, yeah. So I'm blessed that everybody that I've known so far in the 40 plus episodes, I've had a personal relationship with. And the ones that I didn't, I mean, I do now. So it's pretty cool. Question number 8. What is your podcast about? So this is a question that gets asked to me all the time, especially from people like at work or when I tell them, hey, man, I have a podcast. Check it out. They're like, oh, what's it about? So they're looking for a particular subject, right? Sports, or maybe it's about, fighting or whatever it may be about. But I always tell people the podcast is about the story of coming up. So in the streets, in the hood, that term, maybe a lot of people don't know what that term is. Maybe thinking you're growing up, but that term coming up is basically you came up on something, maybe something you earned, you fought for, maybe something you got lucky and you came up, maybe something that you had to really search out and seek out and fight for, and you came up. So the story of coming up, that's what the podcast is summed up about. Question number 9, how hard is it to put together a podcast? So it's pretty rough. I mean, I'm not going to lie. It is a lot of work if you want to do it the right way. So I'm not saying like I'm an expert or anything like that, but obviously the audio is always great. I'm not going to lie about that. The video is always tight. I mean, I'm not going to say it's the sharpest because my videography fans out there will probably say, hey, how come your cameras are not as sharp? We're getting there. So there's always equipment that we need better. But is the editing tight? Editing's always on point. That's because my man Cam puts it together. So we've been like accumulating equipment little by little. So it's not cheap equipment. It's good equipment. A lot of the stuff we've been getting lately, we just got the A10 Mini. That's going to help Cam tremendously in the editing room. So as we get better, we'll get better cameras and stuff. So on that sense, as far as equipment, yeah, it takes a little bit of time. I am a perfectionist. I want to do it the right way. We could have went all audio, right? And just put audio out. It's easy, safe bet. You can record on your phone. You can record on a little mixer, whatever it may be. I didn't want to do audio. I wanted to do video and audio. That in itself is painful at times because it takes a lot of time. Cam puts in a lot of work. He has to edit all the stuff, sync it up, put the shots in. With our new equipment, it's going to be a lot easier for him. So is it a lot of work? It is a lot of work. You got to be on it every day. You got to search for guests. Hardest part is getting guests in here to record. So that's not always easy. They have crazy schedules. We have a schedule. That's not only my schedule, that's Cam's schedule. Cash's schedule to take pictures. So all that is a lot. So it takes a lot to put it all together. But it's worth it when it's all said and done and you get some DMs, you get some messages, you get some comments, you get some likes, you get some people that say, hey man, that podcast really touched my heart, really changed my thinking, really got me to understand their perspective. That's when it's all worth it. Question number 10, where do you want the podcast to go? Obviously, I mean, in your wildest dreams, you just want your podcast to blow up. I mean, Joe Rogan is like top of the food chain when it comes to podcasts, right? I'm not saying like, hey man, Joe Rogan style. I mean, that's pretty high. And he has almost 2,000 podcasts out there, I think. But if the podcast could just keep growing and growing, and we can just keep building and building off each and every guest, I think that is the goal. Just to keep putting good content out there. I believe all the podcast guests have had really great stories, really good content, and I just want to put it out there and then see where it goes. If it keeps building and building, then eventually, it'll catch on and more people will listen. This is a market that is flooded, right? Everybody and their mom has a podcast. I mean, there's been so many guests. I go to their page. I'm like, I want to book them, and they have their own podcast. I'm like, man, they're not going to come on my podcast. They have their own podcast. They can do whatever they want on their own podcast. So the goal of the podcast is just to keep putting out good content, getting good guests, letting them tell their story, quality as far as sound and visual with videography, and then just letting it go from there. So that's our goal. Just let it keep growing, expanding, getting better. So that'll wrap up the 10 questions for today, our 10 most popular questions. I hope I answered them. I hope you understand where we're coming from. Hey, we're going to try to do this more often. So if you have a question about a particular guest, a particular podcast, how we do things around here, DM us, let us know, and maybe on the next one we'll answer it. So we want to wish everybody out there a happy Thanksgiving. Y'all take care, man. Peace.